Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to share a peek behind the curtain of the new Schleyer-Miller Commons. But first, who am I? I'm Emily Carter of Change Agent Studio, and you might recognize me as having a helping hand behind the scenes in organizing and executing last year's and this year's xtUML Days conference. My road to being here with you giving this presentation has been a rather winding one with some odd twists and turns. I actually started my career out of college with a degree in computer animation and a job touring with bands and doing video work for them at concerts. It taught me many important lessons that I'm grateful to have had so early and to have received in such a rapid fashion. So the three most important lessons that continue to support me in the community building work that I do are, first, everything works if you let it, but when it doesn't, own your mistakes. Number two, begin with trust and honesty and everything will be fine. And three, don't panic, especially when things go terribly wrong. Years later, after leaving touring, I began working at a co-working studio under the title Community Curator. I did not know what it was. I didn't know what a community curator did, but I liked both the words in my title, community and curator. And I was pretty sure I could do it, whatever it was. I signed up for a job, but what I actually got was 4.5 years of education in how to create an atmosphere of curiosity, trust, and authenticity, the building blocks of community. And in many ways, the lessons that I learned previously helped me figure that out. So now I help business owners and entrepreneurs build the foundations of business that can get overlooked in the beginning: mindset, systems and operations, core values, and community. So, what's a community? What do you think of when I say the word community? I'd love for you to go ahead and put a few words, phrases, or ideas in the chat, and I'll pause here for a moment so that you can pop those into the chat. So you might remember potlucks with neighbors or school functions, maybe words like camaraderie or fellowship or welcoming come up for you, or feelings like cozy, appreciated, or accomplished. You might think about your local community, the network of people and institutions in service of the public. But whatever comes to mind, thank you for sharing it. Whatever it brings up for you, I want you to hold on to that feeling that it gives you, the feeling of it. Just take a deep breath and really lean into those words, phrases, or ideas that community conjures for you. The word community gets thrown around kind of a lot these days, especially in marketing, because brands want us to think that what they are presenting us with isn't just transactional. There's a psychology to that, and I'm not going to dive into that with you today, but I'm bringing this up for a really good reason. So these days, we're more likely than ever to stumble on communities, quote unquote communities in name only. And the word is being used, but what's really meant is this is a series of events. This is a Slack group, which is a tool that can be useful to a community, but is not a community in and of itself. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. And this is a bag of salad. Thank you to Fabian Fortmuller for pointing this one out. It's no longer obvious that we're talking about humans in these contexts, is it? They don't always inspire the same kind of words, ideas, and feelings that we were just talking about, do they? Or, as Fabian put it in a 2017 article, in a world where even a bag of salad has a community, what does this word community actually mean? There's a different definition of community that I discovered when I was trying to dig deeper into what creating one would look like. And when I was introduced to Fabian and the community canvas, this is the definition that they used. A community brings people together and makes them feel like they belong. Much of what I know about community, I know not only to my own experimentation and discovery, but also to people like Fabian and his collaborators on the community canvas and the paths they pointed out to me along the way. And I'll reference some of those at the end. So a real community has three components: humans, relationships, and shared identity. So humans, communities are by and for people. Relationships, communities must include mutual trust, a sense of belonging, and some kind of engagement or interaction. And shared identity, a sense of coming together around a common characteristic. But as I learned from Priya Parker, every strong community needs both an I and a we. We're individuals working as a collective. So there's what we accomplish together and the role we play individually doing it. A lot of folks will argue with me on that last one, shared identity, and say it's really a common purpose that brings people together. And that's also true, but that shared purpose is partly an expression of that shared identity. These next few slides come directly from a presentation that Court gave previously to the Schleyer-Meller Community Commons committee members. In the Schleyer-Meller Commons, we have humans, who it's for. This particular community is for Schleyer-Meller practitioners at all levels across the globe. It's for innovative engineering organizations from developers to CEOs, and it's for institutional and corporate educators. We have relationships, and they are in part guided by our values, how things work around here, really. Singularity of method, multiplicity of tooling, engineering rather than crafting systems, openness and governance and participation, and productive collaboration over competition. Our relationships are also guided by our community code of conduct, the rules of engagement, which are, of course, rooted in our values. A code of conduct creates trust, and as Rav Day has also pointed out to me, safety within a community so that we can actually collaborate respectfully together. And we have a purpose that creates our shared identity. We foster collaboration, camaraderie, and advocacy in this community. We advance the method, models, and tooling. And we grow the Schleyer-Meller Commons community by increasing accessibility. Now, people might come to a community because of a shared goal, but they stay in a community because of how that community makes them feel and who it gives them the agency to be or become. Now, you'll hear from Rob later, and he's going to share more about things that are related to these core parts of the community from another perspective. But remember that list I shared earlier of communities that aren't real, the quote unquote communities? So the main reason that they aren't real is because they're missing this secret sauce, the reason people stay, the feeling they get from being in community, plus being or becoming through the influence of the community. So this is actually where things start to get really interesting. So if you've been multitasking, it's time to come back to me now. So rather than talk about this like it's an abstract thing, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the Schleyer-Meller Commons. Most of you have been in this community for a long time. Some of you are new. Maybe this is your very first interaction with this community and you don't have much experience to draw on. But what I want you to do is just pause for a moment and think about this. How does this community make you feel? Now, what has led you to have that particular feeling? Chances are that it involved an interaction with a person. So everyone in a community has a role in that community. There are a few roles in particular that I want to point out, and I'm going to frame them through the lens of my experience in the entertainment industry, because we don't actually have all the formal roles of the Schleyer-Miller Commons codified yet. So we're going to be talking generally about some roles, not specifically identified, codified roles, but a more general overview of what kinds of roles exist within a community. So first, there are stage managers. These are organizers of the action. They make sure that things are happening when they need to happen, where they need to happen. They often go above and beyond to do things for the community, making sure folks feel welcome and offering support. These are typically the leadership within an organization, whether that's a formal or informal designation. In the Schleyer-Miller community, we've recently formalized a couple of those roles with leaders like Mike Lee coordinating things among the OOA team and John Wolf coordinating them among the RD team. And you'll also hear from both of them today. And you'll hear from Rob Day, who is a leader within the community team. There is also a role that I call the orchestra. Each of the teams are a section of the orchestra, and when the teams collaborate, that's the music that they're making. But what I love about this analogy is that it's clear that we each have a role. We each have talents to contribute, a style of creating, and what we create together and how it comes together. It's very unique to the section of the orchestra that we're in and the players that are playing alongside us. There are also xtUMLers, and this is an old word and it's not used all that much these days. I learned it when I was first figuring out what community curator meant as a job title at the co-working studio. I stumbled on Alex Hillman and his thoughts about community management. So if you've ever been on a cruise or gone to a fancy resort with planned entertainment, you'll likely have been engaged by a xtUMLer. So xtUMLers incite action. They're the folks on the cruise that when everyone shows up for the dance party, but no one's on the dance floor, they're the ones engaging people in what's happening and encouraging them to get on the dance floor. So there's this sentence that I read from Alex that really sums it up. xtUMLers meet people at the edges of the crowd, connect with them, and then slowly help those people discover their own way into the mix. When I read that, suddenly my role at Matchbox in building community became really clear. Now, you know what else is great is that we can all be xtUMLers. In fact, a xtUMLer isn't a standalone role. It's actually an attitude. It's a way of being within the community. xtUMLers are the people in this community creating that atmosphere of curiosity, building trust, and modeling authenticity for us. Now, remember when I asked you how this community makes you feel and who has led you to have that feeling? I want you to think for a moment, who was that person? What role was that person filling for you? Were they a stage manager, a xtUMLer, or were they part of the orchestra? They might have been more than one of those. So there are lots of roles in a community, and they're important, whether they're recognized formally or not. And they're actually very critical to the success of this community and what this community creates. Each of the roles that I've talked about are present in the Schleyer-Miller Commons in formal ways, like with the OOA and RD teams, and also in informal ways. So this community, as it transitions to a larger vision of purpose that I touched on earlier, it's still developing both formal and informal roles. And I have some sources that I recommend for getting a sense of what that could look like in the future or where we might turn for examples. And again, I'll put those at the end of this presentation, and I'll also put them in the chat so that you can check those out. Right now, this is the structure that the Schleyer-Miller Commons is aiming for. This graphic is beautiful and conveys a lot, but things appear to be separated and distinct. And that is true to a point, but they're also connected by roles and by this community, which is made up of humans. And I want to credit Rob Day for supplying the rough draft of this particular representation. The current and future leaders of these different pillars that Schleyer-Miller Commons supports will need to help codify how things get done around here in the Schleyer-Miller Commons. And in particular, they're going to help give context to questions like, what are the organization and what are the roles for leadership? What are the decision-making bodies and processes? How do we deal with conflicts? What tools do we already have and how should we integrate them? What more do we need? What's our internal communication like? It's these last two that were toughest to approach because we didn't actually have the right kind of channel for feeling out who had the kind of experience the community team was looking for in terms of providing context for some of these other questions. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to invite Rob to share what we uncovered and what was created. The need for an informal comms channel that would allow for interaction, but maybe not force it. We wanted folks to be able to interact with us pretty seamlessly without a lot of barriers and without it feeling like we were invading your inbox. Now, there's a kind of chicken or egg duality to building how things get done around here. The community will know what's needed by doing what leads to, the fulfillment of that vision. And there will be some necessary experimentation because until things are more codified through experience of fulfilling the big purpose behind the Schleyer-Miller Commons, community values can help guide all of the systems and processes. So again, productive collaboration over competition, openness in governance and participation in it, engineering rather than crafting systems, and singularity of method, multiplicity of tooling. These can guide the way we interact and can help us figure out what those what it looks like to engage in this community and sort of the standards of engagement that we have. There's one last thing that I want to share from Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a source that continues to guide me in much of what I do in my work and in community, and whose guidance I think will help this community develop their own code of conduct, systems and processes, and governance. First, focus on building alignment, not selling ideas, and trust your own work and each other. I really believe that being in community in an intentional way with folks of different backgrounds and experience is the swiftest path to giant leaps. Right now, this community is moving forward both tactically with teams and what they create, and also with the structure that's going to best support that work to make baby steps that over time will look like giant leaps. But we here today will know better. These are the resources that I mentioned. The Community Canvas is a great roadmap for creating documentation around a community and highlights areas that are often forgotten in the early stages of a community's formal development, but become increasingly important as time goes on. Because this community aspires to be open source in nature, I actually recommend referring to the open source guides, particularly the section on building welcoming communities. These guides were created by GitHub to help others with their own open source communities create successful, engaged communities. I also recommend looking at the GitHub Code of Conduct. I really believe that this code of conduct covers the essentials of expectations for the GitHub community as a whole without being overly prescriptive. And so using it as an example for the Schleyer-Miller Commons Code of Conduct will actually help this community build a foundation that creates safety and trust. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Thank you.